What do these leaders know that Democrats in Washington do not?
Well, let's understand, NATO came here at President Biden's invitation, and I think John Kirby has it right. They're here for him, which doesn't mean some people don't have doubts about his age. Hey, I'd like to be 20 years younger myself. But you invited me on your show, so there must be some reason why I'm still vital. Hello, Joe. But my point is, they're here because he invited them, and they're here because this is where to celebrate the 75th anniversary in the Mellon Auditorium where it started. And that celebration is tomorrow night. Then there's a dinner for heads of state. Yeah. Wednesday night, these are all Joe Biden performances. And then there's a huge conversation about Ukraine and also about the buffer zone that the Biden administration has built in the Indo-Pacific to ward against a potential, or to deter, let's put it that way, a potential Chinese annexation of Taiwan. So these are all good foreign policy successes. NATO would not be this strong, I will say this. NATO would not be this strong without Joe Biden's personal leadership over the last 3.5 years.
Well, he said that in a couple of interviews last couple of days as well. And let it be known that no one has ever questioned the vitality or spirit of Jane Harman. But while we're talking about this, Jane, you're a Democrat, and I know you support Joe Biden. I don't know if you want to weigh in on this political storm that he seems to be in the middle of right now. But how does he leverage this NATO summit to appear presidential and vital?
Well, let's watch. Let's see what he does. I mean, there were some appearances over the weekend, one in a black church in Philadelphia where he looked pretty vigorous. I was on a call this morning, or a Zoom, and there he was, and he looked pretty vigorous. I mean, he is being tested. But guess what? It's politics. You can't, you got to take a punch, and you got to be back. And he has taken a lot of punches in his personal and political life over the years. And let's see what he does. I'm betting on Biden. I think he's going to be okay. I'm also seeing, and then you discussed this in the last segment, that Kamala Harris's poll numbers are going up. Polls are early. It's, I think, 40 days before the convention. I think I've got that right. And 140 days before the election. That's a lot of time to turn things around. I saw that in my own races. You know, remember, a long time ago, I served 9 terms in the House of Representatives myself.
Yeah, you know a little bit about running for office. Jens Stoltenberg was asked about this. It was interesting to watch him dance around it on Sunday morning. He was very careful. But the NATO Secretary General spoke with reporters about the war in Ukraine specifically. I want to get into some of the issues that NATO will be dealing with. Jane, here's what he said, and we'll talk about it.
We will increase our support to Ukraine for the long haul, reinforce our collective defense, and deepen our global partnerships. Our most urgent task at the summit will be support to Ukraine. Ukraine must prevail, and they need our sustained support. So at the summit next week, I expect heads of state and government will agree a substantial package for Ukraine.
There's a lot of talk about Trump-proofing at NATO, particularly in the wake of this debate. Jane, as people try to imagine what a Trump 2.0 would mean for NATO, and there's an idea here that the alliance will resolve to take more responsibility for coordinating, for training forces in Ukraine. Should that happen this week in Washington?
Yes, it should. And they should agree, which they are expected to agree, to send a package of not just humanitarian aid and some training pledges for Ukraine, but a package of hardware, long-range, so-called long-range fires, air cover for Ukrainian soldiers who've been fighting in trenches without it for a long time. I think the Biden administration was too cautious and should have sent a lot of things like ATACMS and Patriot systems much, much earlier. Europe is going to step up and do that. Let me just say 2 more things about this. First of all, salute the decade of service by Jens Stoltenberg. He has been an exemplary head of NATO. He steps down soon, and the head of Denmark, Rutte, will take over. Everyone thinks he will be great. And, you know, salute Europe and NATO for a good pick. And while we're at it, let's talk about the EU, the French elections, the UK elections. Yeah. It's not the far right that's in command here. So, I mean, what should we expect NATO to do? We should expect NATO countries to step up and provide more of their GDP for NATO. And they've done this. I think it was, the number was 5 or 7 countries had spent 2% of GDP on NATO when Biden took over. It's now 23 countries, 7 to go, and some are well over 2%. Why does this matter? Because Ukraine and Russia are in Europe's front door. And this is existential for them. It matters to us, too. But you're talking about Trump-proofing NATO. If the countries step up, that's part way there, no matter what Trump does. But also, Congress passed a law, as I recall it, a few months ago that said the U.S. could not get out of NATO without congressional approval. And I don't think that's coming anytime soon. Approval for getting out.
Well, let me ask you quickly. Yeah, you mentioned the French elections, and I'm glad you did, Jane. To what extent does that bring instability to these conversations at the NATO summit this week? Just the basic uncertainty that we're now looking at.
Well, there's going to be a hybrid combo government, but the far right is not going to play a big role. The isolationists did not win. And so, yes, maybe France will move left, I would assume, on domestic policy. But I don't see any evidence that Macron's foreign policy is going to change by this election result. And, you know, some people think the French are difficult, but they certainly support NATO, and they support NATO's activities in Europe. And the U.K. election, let's understand that, most people think is going to bolster NATO. So I think and one more thing, the EU elections. Ursula von der Leyen is going to continue as EU president. This is another victory for the center/left, and I think these are all good signs that Europe is going to be stable. And now we have to make sure America remains stable too.